We are here for the panel Cradle to Cradle Agriculture, Carbon Sink and Nutrient Cycle. And that's part of the special track. And we want to start with presentations from the three panelists of about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, we'll have about 5 minutes for direct questions to each of the presentations. And if we are very good, we have 10 minutes to 15 minutes in the end for discussion, but we are already a little bit late. So we see, but we have lunchtime afterwards. So if you agree, we will also be 10 minutes late afterwards so that we have really 1 hour. And it's probably also good because it detends a little bit the queue at the lunch. So we will start with Dr. Martin Lee Beck. He's Managing Director of Remondis Aqua Industries. Remondis is one of the world's largest service providers for recycling, service and water. And it is active on 4 continents and has over 30,000 employees. Remondis Aqua Industries is a leading German provider for municipal and industrial water management. And using sewage sludge as a valuable resource for energy or agricultural use, but the main thing we are talking about here is now to recycle phosphorus. When we're talking about CO2, we normally talk about emissions of cars, of buildings, of industrial plants, but we are not talking about soil and the composition of the soil. And one thing is really that phosphorus is a resource which we need for our body each day, and which is, very, very rare if we look at it, or probably not if we recycle it. And that's why Martin Lee Beck is here to talk about that, and he has been a managing director at Remondis Aqua Industries since 2003, and he is responsible for the technical development, and he is also the developer and the co-inventor of the Remondis TetraPhos process, which deals with the phosphorus recycling. And I think this is a point which is very important for us, and because we are dependent on phosphorus, please make your presentation, Mr. Lee Beck.
Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Griefan, for the nice introduction. So, as you already said, apart from the question of energy management and CO2, climate change and these things, the reuse of resources is one of the key factors for reducing human footprint in an industrial society that we live in. And, okay, I don't see it here. It's okay. Yeah. So I talk about phosphorus, and what is phosphorus? It's an element, one of the first elements which were invented as a single element in Hamburg by Mr. Brandt. Phosphorus is an essential part of the energy metabolism in all plants and all animals and all life all over the world. Without phosphorus, there is no life on Earth. Phosphorus, therefore, is not substitutable. There is no other element which can play that role in the biological cycle, but it is a limited source. It is originating only from a few countries in the world, let's say not more than 10 countries all over the world has phosphorus resources. The exploitation and beneficiation process of phosphorus in that countries is causing tremendous ecological footprint and at last imports pollutants via the byproducts or the basic products for phosphorus industry to our agriculture right now. So at last, it is a key element it is scarce. It is a discussion how scarce it is, but we are dependent on that, and therefore it makes sense to think about recycling. So as I said, you can see here the world and the resources of phosphorus, how they are distributed. You see only a few countries. The biggest resources has Morocco today, and followed by other countries like Syria, Israel, China, which are serving the world with phosphorus. There are two different sources of phosphorus, sedimental phosphorus and magmatic phosphorus. This is only to know because the magmatic phosphorus is much cleaner, but the most phosphorus in the world is a sedimental phosphorus, which coming from ancient oceans around a belt on the equator of the world. So what you see and what I want to show you with this map is that the highest populated areas in the world are completely depending on phosphorus. So agriculture in Europe, or especially in India, where over 1 billion people are living, is completely depending on phosphorus imports from those countries you see in that map. So this alone is a reason to think about recycling and to think about how dependent we are with that, on that element. The other reason is that phosphorus ore is exploited from the soil, from open mines in that countries, and it has a very it is polluted, naturally polluted, especially with heavy metals and uranium. And during the beneficiation process of phosphorus ore, which takes place normally in the lands or in the countries where it is examined, the pollutants are transferred to the basic product. This is phosphoric acid. Phosphoric acid plays a central role in the industrial phosphoric industry, and therefore it is important to focus on that. What you see on the right side is so-called MGA. It's merchant grade acid. So this is the first product which comes out of the phosphorus ore while it is processed in the countries. The pollution is transferred from the ore to the phosphoric acid. And beside that fact, imagine that for every ton of phosphoric acid, 5 tons of polluted phosphogypsum is produced. And this phosphogypsum normally stays in the countries where it is produced, and it is not clear how it is disposed or treated there. So phosphorus cycle, I put it here. Phosphorus is implemented in the plants. We grow, we eat and the animals eat, we eat the animals, and after all, we store a bit of phosphorus, so we have phosphorus in us. That's normal in our bones, especially, but we let the phosphorus out after we took on while eating. So the phosphorus at last comes to the wastewater and to the wastewater treatment plant. And in the wastewater treatment plant, it is so-called eliminated, which means it goes. We care for the fact that the phosphorus is going out of the clean water, and at last it comes to the sewage sludge in biological treatment of wastewater. This sewage sludge might be, or is, or was a source for fertilizers or fertilizing agricultural spaces. This is becoming more and more difficult, especially in Europe, because the areas where you can put the sewage sludge on are limited. There are useful legislation that limit that use of sewage sludge in agriculture, because in the sewage sludge you have organic pollutants as well, you have heavy metals, microplastic, and so on and so forth. So what to do then? How to close the phosphorus cycle? And this is what Ms. Griefmann already said. We did work on a process to recycle that phosphorus out of sewage sludge. And this process is able to close that phosphorus cycle. And if you imagine, this is just a nice idea, but if you imagine that all of the sewage sludge which is produced in Germany would be transferred to phosphoric acid, this is what our process does, you can save about 40% of the complete import of phosphoric acid to Germany. So this is a great amount. Why only 40%? The other part of phosphorus is going to the animals. So how we integrate that phosphorus in the technical chain of wastewater treatment. You have the wastewater treatment plant from left to right. I hope you can see that, otherwise I explain it. Afterwards you have the sewage sludge. It is dried or dewatered just to limit transportation costs. And then you have the tetraphos process, which firstly mineralizing the sewage sludge. Okay. And out of the produced ash of that process, we recover phosphorus in form of phosphoric acid. Another benefit of the process is that we not only recover phosphorus out of the sewage sludge, but minerals and gypsum, clean gypsum in that case, and metal salts as well, which we can use in the cycle of wastewater treatment again. So this is, on a short view, the tetraphos process and the cycle of phosphorus. And the task we have as a family company in circular economy is recovering waste or resources from waste. In terms of wastewater treatment, we speak about aquatic mining, and we are just at the beginning with that. Phosphorus is the first thing, and the other, for example, fats, celluloses, and so on, will follow. So not only we think that it's a good idea, other people thought that as well. This process is awarded. And I can only advertise here for you as the cradle-to-cradle community, for us as a company in circular economy, to stop distinguishing between waste and resource, because waste is the resource, and we need to give it back to the cycle. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Many thanks. Thank you very much. I think it's a very important point that Remondis is one of the first companies which has started to be, let's say, a logistical enterprise in getting resources back. I think it started very early, the work with Cradle to Cradle, and this is one part of it, and phosphorus is, I think, a very important part for the scarce resources we have. So if you have some quick questions, we will answer them now, and then we hope that we can have some discussion after the three presentations. So is there some quick question? Ah, ja.
Ja, darf ich in Deutsch fragen? Ja?
Habe ich ja gesagt, ja. You allow Steve,
ist das richtig, dass Sie aus der Phosphorasche recyceln? Das heißt, vorher geht die Verbrennung dieser Produkte, die Monoverbrennung.
Das ist richtig.
Ja, und das muss man, denke ich, mitdenken, um das als ökologisch bewerten zu können. Wir werden einen Infostand machen, wie es dezentral besser geht.
Gut, gibt es weitere Fragen? Das ist eine Bürgerinitiative. Es wäre schön, wenn immer die Fragen stellen, auch ganz kurz was sagen. Sehr gute Idee, habe ich sonst immer gesagt. Es war bloß eine überwältigende Menge. Bitte, die kurze Fragen stellen, auch bitte kurz
das
sagen,
habe ich
wo Sie
nicht verstanden.
herkommen.
Das würde mich jetzt auch interessieren.
Umweltschutzverein Isernhagen, mein Name ist Lemke, ich bin Gründungsmitglied dieses Vereins.
Er war
Wunderbar.
unser Schatzmeister hier, also kennt sich gut aus.
Isernhagen, ich komme auch aus Hannover. Wir können uns gerne unterhalten.
Ja. Gibt es weitere Fragen? Are there any more questions?
Ganz da hinten links.
Ah, da hinten. Okay. In the back.
Hi, my name is Caroline Hale. I'm a lawyer. I'm working a lot in the field of agriculture, also in topics of regenerative agriculture. And my question basically is, our modern agriculture system is based on phosphorus, and we know that we have the natural sources for maybe another 50 years, so not a very long time, or 100 years, so not that much. With the production at the moment, how much of the material of phosphor we need or we use in Germany for agriculture, for example, how much can you cover with your approach?
Yeah, this is what I try to say. Theoretically, you can save about 40% of the needed phosphoric acid. So this is the amount of phosphorus which is in the resource wastewater. Let's say it like this.
One other question we can take and then we go to the next. Da, in der Mitte bitte. Ja, hier der mit dem gestreiften.
Ja, Dieter von Bröckl, ich bin von der Regionalgruppe in München. Ich habe eine zweiteilige Frage. Das eine ist, es scheint hier irgendwie mal um einen Prozess zu gehen. Warum geht man das nicht in der Landwirtschaft direkt anders an? Es wird immer hinterher versucht, es wieder gut zu machen. Ja. Und das macht mich irgendwie ein bisschen kirre. Ja. Anstatt
das
die
hatten wir in der
Problematik,
vorherigen Diskussion.
ja, anstatt der Problematik direkt auf den Nerv zu gehen. Und das Zweite ist, wenn ich mir die Firma Remondis anschaue, sie machen sehr viel im Schulprogramm auch. Und da gibt es überhaupt nichts mit Kreislaufwirtschaft, ja, überhaupt nichts. Es geht immer nur ausschließlich um ihr Geschäftsmodell. Ja. Einfach, wie trennt man besser? Und das sind so Sachen, die ich nicht ganz zusammenkriege, warum sie hier sind.
Warum bin ich hier? Vielleicht zum ersten Teil Ihrer Frage. Warum macht man erst immer hinterher alles? Das ist eine berechtigte Frage, nur in dem Fall in der Frage Phosphor ist es einfach so, wir ernähren uns, die Pflanzen wachsen, wir ernähren uns von den Pflanzen oder von den Tieren, die die Pflanzen gegessen haben. Das heißt, der Phosphorkreislauf beginnt, ohne dass wir wirklich sagen können, wir hören damit auf, weil ohne Phosphor, das habe ich versucht zu erklären, wächst nun mal keine Pflanze.
Hier auch so. Nicht übrigens. Also wir brauchen 2 Gramm, wir nehmen 2 Gramm auf und müssen 2 Gramm wieder abgeben jeden Tag. Und
dieser Phosphor ist insofern erstmal im Kreislauf. Das ist... sorry for that. Yeah. The question was why we try to heal all those things or the phosphorus issue at the very end of the process, and why we're not, if I understood it correctly, why we're not starting in the beginning. And I was explaining that the Phosphorus cycle naturally starts with production of plants or growth of plants, which is a natural law, more or less. And our food production leads to the uptake of phosphorus. We take it off, and it is in the wastewater. So the question is what to do with the phosphorus in the wastewater. In former times, the wastewater was led into rivers and seas with the phosphorus, and it's causing tremendous eutrophication because phosphorus is a limited source even in nature. So if you put the phosphorus in the rivers or in the seas, you have a bad impact on all life in aquatic systems. So this is the reason why we extract the phosphorus out of the wastewater, and we have a waste called sewage sludge, and then we can start to recycle, because then we have it separated from the process or from the chain. The other question is, I don't know if I'm really understood that, why I'm here and why Remondis, so Remondis is a family company, I can answer it like this, treating waste since more than 75 years right now. Starting from logistic level, up to circular economy, what is our approach or our core business right now. And I think, yes, it is a business, so we need to earn money with that. On one hand, it is a responsibility even of our company to introduce the fact that recycling and circular economy needs technique, and it needs an effort, and it needs invention. And this is what we're doing, of course, to serve our clients, which are municipals, which is the industry. And this is the reason, hopefully, why I'm here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we can discuss this further later. In an ideal world, we have only products which are designed in a way that you separate all the materials at once, and that we have an ideal agriculture policy, as we discussed in the forum before, or in the plenum before. But we are not there yet. And in the intermediate time, we have to get as many resources back as possible. And that is one company who's doing it. We are not yet in an ideal world. We are aiming to it. And then a company like Remondis would be like a resource bank, which collects the resources and separates again. Now I want to present Mr. Steven Beckers. He is a founder of Lateral Thinking Factory Consulting, powered by Bopro. They are in a consultant office for urban studies and strategies, and it delivers better human habitats through circular economy implementations in urban surroundings. And as we're talking about scarce materials, it's water, it's resources, and Steven Beckers really works on this water and resources in towns. He's an architect, and he has several international prizes and worked in different cities in Europe. And one of the outstanding projects is the headquarters of the European Commission in Brussels, where he tried to implement some of the things he will talk about. He's also a professor and a trainer of one of the 6 worldwide accredited cradle-to-cradle architects and consultants, so that he can really introduce these ideas also in the European Commission. Please, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, I've been very fascinated with Cradle to Cradle from the very beginning. And I don't know why, maybe it's because I'm a bad architect, but Michael Braungart used to call me the phosphorus architect, and then the nitrate architect, and I'll try to explain you why. And also I will explain to you what worked and what didn't work in this domain. It started with my real concern about water. I was not even thinking of phosphorus or anything else at the time. For me, water is the rarest element on Earth, despite all the oceans and what we can imagine. I think that less than 1% of water is actually accessible to us. That's fresh water. And it started with a project in Brussels for the European Commission. This is not the EU headquarters. I tried the same thing in the EU headquarters, but it didn't manage. That was 10 years earlier than this one. This one was in the early 2000s, where in the atrium, we installed greenery, which is mainly polishing the water after a special treatment and filtering with a biofilter. I will not go in details. I'm not a chemist, and I don't want questions about chemistry. But the important thing is that we managed to transform a 70,000 square meter office building for the European Commission, 95% autonomous in water. Now, it's not working for the moment. It did work. It is not working for the moment because the European Commission had a framework contract with a maintenance company who decided it was too complicated and put everything in a sewer. So if anybody has an influence, please put it back running. At the time, we managed to obtain, with Art and Build I was a partner with, we managed to obtain 50% more buildability on the site, from 57,000 square meters to 75,000 square meter, which of course for the developer was very important. And yes, it needs to make money sometime to push ideas, just to follow up on the discussion we had before. But for 150,000 euro of investment, there was 25,000 extra square meters of office, and the building was sold at the highest price ever in Brussels afterwards to an Australian fund, if I remember well, for about twice the price that is usually in Brussels. So for 150,000 euros, at the end of the day, in terms of profit, it was quite amazing for the developer, which encouraged other projects of the kind in Brussels. The system was quite simple. It's exactly what you explained, but locally in the building. Funnily enough, I tried to do that with Greenpeace headquarters I designed in Brussels also, but at the time Greenpeace said, and I was quite amazed by that Brussels office was only dealing with energy, so they were not interested in water. So I'd never managed to do it there. So nobody's perfect, and I hope it's evolved. The other thing why it's not working now, and I try to go fast, if you see the plans at the top, that was the variety of plants that was necessary to clean and polish the water after the biological treatment. And the maintenance company decided these plants were too complicated, and they removed them all and put one sort of plant, papyrus, in which was not washing anything. And then, of course, the water got a little bit brown. It still worked, but the water got a little bit brown in the toilets where it was regenerated. And then they had the reverse effect because people kept pushing, thinking that it was not clean enough. So the water consumption went up. So that's why they stopped it. But it was because some crazy guy decided just to, not knowing what he was doing, change all the plants. Nevertheless, we managed in that building to work like the equivalent of 800 equivalent habitats water treatment. And it did work very, very well. And also, when I designed that for the Berlaymont building in the first place, the idea was not to have to replace all the sewer that was existing because it was being blocked many times and flooded the car parks many times. So this is why I was called the Phosphorus architect by Michael Brongard. Now, the project I'm working on now and which is really working, and working so well that it's being supported by Veolia now, so it's not only Remondis that's entering this world, is a farm. And it's a farm which is an answer to what the food industry being challenged now by the demand for healthy and traceable and local food. And that's what we did as a vision. You recognize this diagram from cradle to cradle to start from the quality and from the vision rather than starting from the quantity and the certification. Our vision was to supply fresh and healthy food grown within an aquaponic system integrated to urban and suburban points of sale and transformation according to C2C. So what does that mean according to C2C? Is the fish feed aims at becoming 70% biological vegetable fibers and 30% of insect proteins. I'm not there with insect proteins yet. We are testing. For the moment, we're using proteins from fish, from the fish industry, which is more difficult to trace. So I'm not too happy with that for the moment. The interesting with the aquaculture that we have, because we raise fish in the water we save, is a density which is limited by the capacity of the biofilter. So you cannot have over density. Okay, it's these fish they live in groups, and they like that, and it works very well. And the more they are happy, the more they grow, and the more I can sell it. No antibiotics, because otherwise it would kill the biofilter. I'll show you that in a moment. No pesticides in the plants. Aquaponic is plants and fish in the same circle. We use quality renewable energy, solar panels, but also we are taking the heat from 1,000 square meter of cold rooms of butcher shops downstairs in the market, and you will see that as well. The system captures 30 kilos of CO2 per year per square meter of greenhouse where we're growing tomatoes and herbs. Water autonomy is quite amazing. In fact, we're not autonomous. We are just using 100 times less water than the same production elsewhere. So again, I'm very pleased with this water, which was the origin of this work. And we do not reject anything in the environment apart from something which is much cleaner than what we reject ourselves in our toilets. But we reuse completely water. We clean the air and reduce heat island effects. Greenhouses are actually creating a greenhouse effect, quite logically, and the plants are cooling it. And we work with social inclusiveness, and of course food, as we are here to talk about food, is a universal language, and the area where we are is 172 different nationalities in this district of Anderlecht in Brussels. So basically put a greenhouse on a building, you collect heat and CO2. The aquaponic system is very simple. Doesn't like aquaponics. Aquaponics is a mix between aquaculture and hydroponics, and you see the nitrogen cycle here, starting with the production of ammonium by the fish and transformed into nitrites by bacteria, and then again in nitrate and used by the plants, and it goes back to the fish. If somebody's interested to know more, I'll give another talk more detailed on this. This is a diagram. This is the system that is not wasting any water, because even the water that is not used is used in external gardens, and the mud, which we are not using, is used for agriculture elsewhere. So this is the farm. You can see greenhouses here. It's 4,000 square meter of roof, 2,000 square meter of greenhouse, and what it does is all of this at the same time. I'll let you read it, but the advantages of being in a city is on the left. The advantages between being under the sky is on the top, and the advantages and the synergies between the farm and the building underneath are underneath. But what is interesting is all the things we can produce. And again, without wasting water, and we can produce really clean products. This is what it looks like. External gardens, the greenhouses, herbs, tomatoes, and the fish production. The fact of producing proteins in a city is for me very important because I believe that the city really has to be productive at every level. And now we are producing here about 30,000 kilos or 30 tons of striped bass per year in this operation. Remember, this is on the roof in the middle of the city. And what is important for me is when we started this project and looking at other projects, sometime in the city, sometime outside the city, is just this farm is connecting. Of course, we need energy, so we talk about solar and wind energy and photovoltaic and the rest. Talking about the water sector, I mentioned already, CO2 capture, there are many things happening there. Heat and energy recovery, we are obviously attracting other initiatives, and also we can make a cradle-to-cradle or circular economy park around us. And we're working on a project like that in Antwerp, over 80 hectares of reclaimed black land, where there was a lot of oil, to actually really create this and create a circular economy with positive impact, or a cradle-to-cradle park where all the other companies will have to be within the same wavelength. And of course, you could put another company in the middle and these loops carry on. So for me, that's the important thing. And we have other projects in Paris, in Milano, and in Lille coming up at a much larger scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen. So we will first have some questions from the audience. I think there is one. Probably you try it. It's a little bit difficult. In the middle.
It's quite a sport, this microphone job. Huh?
Hello, my name is Oliver from Hamburg. I'm here as a private person. Steve, it was an amazing talk. I like this idea very much. Can you imagine to build very small and very, let's say, cheap solutions with this idea, let's say for $1,000 a year, or for $1,000 bucks per unit, to bring this into the world, and not only to to Europe?
I have an NGO in Ethiopia, and it's sleeping for the moment. And my aim is, once we've proved it here, because it's quite technically, it's not only technical, it's really to understand. I mean, I'm an architect, I knew nothing about fish and a little bit about plants. I think it is possible. I don't believe into very small systems in Europe, you know, the ones you can buy and put an aquaponic at home. It's very nice, but don't eat the fish. I tell you, when I see the control we have for the quality and the diseases and things like that, I think it's just dangerous. And that's the problem in urban agriculture. Also, there are many initiatives that are made at a very amateur level and with some risk. I think it's fantastic. And it's lots of social issues and social bonding that's happening. But I'm really afraid of the small systems. So our system can obviously be simplified. And as I was saying, we're working with Veolia on the new system, which will be modular. And it will be 8 tons, 20 tons, 50 tons units. And first of all, you can separate them because the problem is, once, as you cannot use any antibiotics or any, let's say, artificial ways of curing the fish if there is a problem, then if there is a problem, you need to be able to isolate and get rid of one part. This is the risk. Like any agriculture, we're talking about the living. I'll give you an example. Our greenhouse, one day I arrived in the greenhouse and all the leaves from the tomato plants were yellow or even white. And I asked my grower, I said, this is catastrophe, whatever. And he just said, Stephen, you want it natural, no? And I said, yeah, but I've never seen that in a greenhouse. He said, of course, because in all the greenhouses, they spray it with lots of things. This is just a fly that's putting its eggs on the leaves, and that's it. So all these things are possible, and the difficult thing is to find people and train people, which I would like to do, to be able to run these systems anywhere.
I think we are still in a pioneering phase from that, and
Yeah.
it has to be improved. But there was another question there.
Yes, thanks for that really terrific presentation. Really great and inspiring. You, especially the beginning when you talked about the idiot who broke it for you. So that's my question here. This is absolutely beautiful, and I can imagine the complexity of it. Where the world is full of idiots who will try to do that, how are you going to protect it? What's the kind of plan to make it, to use that terrible word, sustainable in the real world?
It's a very good question. As I said, it can be dangerous if it's not done properly. And I'm not saying we are doing it properly. We're just trying to do our best, and we really put all the elements together to make it happen. Idiots are everywhere, and I'm more afraid of people don't believing in it, or saying, you're not going to replace the normal agriculture with this. And it's been like that for solar panels or windmills or whatever, talking about energy. So this is why, as an architect, I've always made sure to link the project with many, many other loops. Then it becomes essential to that. And you cannot isolate these projects. If you want it cradle to cradle, you really need to be the heart of something. And I believe that removes some idiots when you do that.
One third question we can take. Yeah?
My name is Gunnar, I'm an agriculture engineer, and I just want to know how many square meters do you need, in average, to feed an average adult? Just he or she may survive by your system.
Well, it depends how much fish you eat per day. But frankly, I cannot answer the question per person, or even how many people or families I can feed. I can give figures of amount that is produced. I can tell you that in Belgium, people eat 20 kilos of fish per year in average. It's 22 in Flanders and 18 in Wallonia, and it's probably 19 in Brussels. But you have to know that 90% of the fish that have been eaten is combination of salmon and herring, I think, or the like. So we are in a very, very small niche. What is important for me is more how this can influence other ways. For this year, or last year, for the first time, Brussels was present at the Agricultural Fair of Belgium, which is in Wallonia, Foire de Libramont. And people were saying, are you crazy? You're going there, and all the farmers are going to shoot at you because they think you are a danger, or whatever. most of them, especially the young ones, the sons and daughters of the farmers, came and said, can we come and see how it works, because we think we could adapt our production. And if this could influence Westland and the south of Spain, where all the greenhouses are, it is possible. So for the moment, I cannot tell you, because we've only been running really for 2 years, and it's not running according to plan, because it's a lot of testing now. What I see is that the demand is huge for that, and that we can expand in the city first, because that's where people see it and understand it and talk about it, and then we have in short loops and all that. But I think in the countryside, and this afternoon we'll have a talk about agriculture and talking about how it happens in the countryside in India. I think it can also have an influence there, and as I was answering before, I think we can simplify the system, but first we want to control how it works.
Thank you very much. We will probably have time afterwards. And thank you, Stephen. So, now we come from phosphorus to food in the city to a holistic system, which is Sekem. Sekem is an agricultural farm in Egypt, which tries to green the desert again. And we have with us Maximilian Abouleish-Boes, and he will tell a little bit about the holistic approach the whole Sekem project shows, and he's mainly responsible for the textile part of it, but nevertheless he can talk about the greening of the desert. I visited him when he was basically on a place and tried to green the desert, so he has a practical experience. He is German, but he lives now since 2009, so more than 10 years in Egypt, and his mission is to help to transform Sekem's organizational structures and ecosystems towards higher resilience in serving the purpose of sustainable development. And that's not only for the farm itself, but also for the villages which are around that. And besides that, Max supports a subsidiary Naturex by exporting organic baby garments, and you have probably seen that with Alnatura. You see sometimes baby garments from Sekem. And he's also a lecturer at the Heliopolis University in the Faculty of Business and Economics. And yeah, let's hear about the farm, your work, and trying to expand, because they need people to help. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this warm introduction. It is always a pleasure to be able to present the idea and to see how it resonates. And I wanted to lay the focus on greening the desert. And I want to start with a bigger picture. I was recently shown this map on the world by John DeLew. He's an ecologist and filmmaker. And he pointed towards this kind of part in the middle in the world where we see desert. And it doesn't really look so natural if you look at all the other continents. It looks as if something was maybe different in the past, and indeed there are plausible hypotheses that this desert could have been made by humans, and we have to go back in history. And I want to do that to understand also the kind of circular perspective on humankind and the lessons we can learn, and in the context where we stand. Because right in the middle here, you have Egypt. And right next to Egypt, you have in the eastern Mediterranean zone the ancient Neolithic area where humankind had its cradle of civilization, started agriculture, and maybe that was a source of desertification that I will come back in a moment. But we have to see that humans arrived somehow in paradise, in a functional ecosystem in the planet, and then started doing agriculture. And one thing that happened is grazing and animal and animal husbandry and unsustainable forms of grazing that that took away, for example, grass and other biodiversity from the soil. And when sunlight hits the soil directly, it becomes very hot, and there is a temperature differential that is quite high when you compare naked bare soil compared to covered soil. The kind of effect that you have from this heated extreme temperature is that you have an airflow that is going up, and eventually, because the Sinai here in the middle is between a tectonical structure of the planet, between two different geological systems, that it created a vortex of air going up from this heat. And we are talking here about thousands of years where this happened, and it could have created a kind of inflow of air that has been then carried in the higher ozone layer, and then the humidity was gone. Because if we study the Sinai, we see, and we look at core samples from the soil, we see that 7,000 years ago there was a lot of biodiversity from the Indian Ocean flowing in, and a lot of humidity flowing in. But when this man-made desert started to change the weather pattern and kind of bringing the air up, then the air cooled down and pushed on the other front away this inflow of biodiversity, humid, rich inflow of weather or of climate from the Indian Ocean, and that started to create this desert possibly. So scientists who look at that, they cannot say no, that's not true. It's a plausible argument to say, hey, this is the reason why we see these riverbeds there. This is the reason why this has been green. And this is for me very important to understand, because a lot of agricultural practice in the world, they create desert. They degrade landscapes. I just recently came across this article that described how agricultural system put pressure on planetary boundaries. Maybe you know about this argument, or these 9 planetary boundaries from Rockström, and 4 of them are in particularly stressed by agricultural systems. And if we look today, we are feeding almost 7 billion people. If we would do it in a way that we would not stress the biosphere, land systems like forests, freshwater use, and nitrogen flow, if we would not overstress these planetary boundaries, we could only possibly feed 3.4 billion people. So something is not going in a sustainable way in the way we feed the world. I think that's not a kind of surprise for most of you sitting here. And by changing different patterns, especially how we use resources, how we apply nutrient cycles, and how we use water, etc. So how do we change the way where we do agriculture, and how we could feed a lot of many more people inside the planetary boundaries without stressing them. Of course, reducing food loss is also a huge argument, and also changing diets. But it was for me a really nice argument to say, okay, we have to rethink agriculture and exactly go to the core and to the root cause of the problem, and ask ourselves, okay, how can agriculture be part of the solution and not part of the problem? So we are asking ourselves here in Egypt, as anywhere else in the world, what future do we want, and how do we bring it to life? At the moment, in the limited area of land that Egypt has, we are only living on 6% of the land, with the same amount of people like Germany has, even more, and a comparable land size. We have such a pressure and stress on the old land, how we say, the Nile Delta and the Nile Belt, that we are seeing pollution coming in, and even if you grow organically and so on, you feel more and more the stress of the environment and the pollution effect and the systemic interlinkages of having residues on crops, etc., that show to you we are really reaching a boundary. And for us, part of the solution is definitely also going into the new land and start greening the desert. For us, greening the desert is an essential solution for food security locally, is an essential solution for showing the world how to cope with degenerated landscapes. And I think what is important to say up front, it's always also needed, it needs a social innovation. We cannot go into the desert just with a bunch of soldiers, but we need to build communities there. And another thing that you really need in the beginning is compost. Compost is so important because I don't want to say that the desert is dead, but obviously desert soil doesn't have a lot of organic matter, nothing, and you need to build it up. You need to build a home for your best supporters, namely the microorganisms. You need microorganisms to produce nutrients and to work with nature, and that is why we having the need for an integrated approach that includes animals, that includes also biomass production in order to make compost out of it, and then to bring it out to the land. You need, in the beginning, maybe around 20 ton per hectare, so it's like 2 kilo per square meter, and then you can start greening the desert, and it's really a miracle that this can happen. And of course, carbon can be stored in soil. According to our measurements, 3.2 tons of CO2 can be stored per hectare per year, and that's a house number that can really have a large impact on the world's climate balance. I mean, agriculture is counting for roughly and forestry counting for roughly 25% of global emissions. Imagine it can store global emissions. Trees are another part of the story, and trees are not only windbreaks to protect against hot desert storms, but also they are an ideal carbon stock as well. So they invite birds, but they also store carbon. Roughly 33 kilos per tree per year can be stored in average. Gold Standard came to us, they certified our method, and obviously you have to look in average, and but you can start somewhere, and that's really great because you can, with 30 trees per year, you can you can store 1 ton of carbon, and that's great, and that provides also some financial income streams for us to finance all that sustainable agriculture that is obviously sometimes put onto unfair competition with a subsidized conventional practice. Obviously, I cannot talk without mentioning water as a kind of critical resource, and I can tell you up front, yes, water is scarce in Egypt. 80% of the water is consumed in agriculture. Most of it is coming from the Nile and the underground Nile, and some of it comes from fossil groundwater sources. Yes, we have a limited resource and we have to deal sustainably with it, and organic soil can help because organic soil can capture and store more water. Yes, there are 80% of farms that are, or 70% that are running still on flood irrigation. We can change that. But also we have to think really big, because when I see the desert in the beginning that is so big, we have to maybe ask ourselves, how can we create enough biodiversity and not only go in with the need of planting products and selling them on the market, but changing the perspective on what really creates value for humankind. It's not only the products that we use for the local market and for the export, it's for the ecosystem functions that we are able to support by greening the desert. This is 40 years after starting greening the desert. you see in the morning there's humidity, there's moisture, everything starts to work in a systemic way, but you have to do it large scale. We can give only a small example. If you really want to change weather patterns, you have to work 100 by 100 kilometers, and you have to reach, 21 gram of humidity in the air in order to make it rain. But that's the kind of crazy story, and it's a kind of energizing struggle. We are all here in together. We have to collaborate together in order to make weather patterns change. And this is my son looking at the farm in Wahat Baharia, Western Desert, and I hope that he can go there and learn a lot about nature and help us to do this. And it's always a mission impossible, and it can never be done alone. So we have to always integrate it with people, with education, and with a lot of infrastructure needed in the nowhere in the desert. But I think that's an exciting adventure, and I want to invite every one of you to come and have a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, I can only support this wish to visit Sekem. It's really an experience, and you really learn a lot, and you can really see a lot of cycles which are there. So, other questions? Here. Wo ist das Mikro? Da.
Well, fantastic, and congratulations. I saw on one of your slides some sheep and goats. I've been part of programs in the mountains north of Ethiopia where there was a public program to plant trees and all that. Because the shift of mind and the way of raising these cattle is not changing, all the plants are eaten within the next week or so by the goats and all that because there's no control. So how do you manage that?
Well, we embed the whole cattle management in the whole farm system, meaning that we have a way to guide the cattle to graze on specific areas for a specific time, so it can have even a positive effect, like I've learned now, this kind of stimulating effect. The problem is if you do it or if you let it be done in a nomadic culture that may, by good intentions, have an effect that is not intended by the one responsible for holding the sheep. So I have to educate and also put every element in the context of the totality of the farm organism. Yeah. So without also people thinking about the integration of a sustainable feeding, then it wouldn't work. But you need the livestock as well.
Raphael Fasco from Switzerland. It's quite a big work to green deserts. Can you talk maybe a little bit tricks that you used, a little bit like the key points, plant succession? I don't know where the big elements are. And the second question is, how soon do you start to harvest and to sell products?
Yeah. So one thing is you have to start really making windbreaks from the early beginning on. Casuarina trees are very good for that. They don't need a lot of water. They grow very fast and they protect you from wind. So that's one thing. The other thing is you have to build a crop rotation with leguminose, like an organic crop rotation would recommend. And for instance, you can combine peppermint with peanuts, and peanuts are building also CO2 in the also a leguminose is building soil structure and nutrients then in. There's a lot of pressure, as I said, to start growing cash crops, which is an expression of a system that does not yet value ecological functions enough. You can, but still you have to count 5 to 10 years to really make a farm reasonably independent or financially. So it's not an endeavor that you can do only as a farmer. That's what we experienced. You have to go in with innovative forms of financing or strategic partners from the industry side that kind of help you overcome that 5 to 10 years of not being able to cover your costs, because infrastructure for water management, compost, etc., all that builds structure and does not deliver any kind of return yet. It's for the future. But we all know that the financial system or economic paradigms are rather short-term and rather profit-oriented. So we need to rethink also the way of financing that.
Uli Walter can talk a lot about that.
Yes.
He was responsible for a long time, or helping a long time on that. So there was another question there, and then there.
Martin Stengel, Ökodorf, Siebenlinden und auch Global Eco-Village Network. Just to mention there's a relation because I have a deep gratitude also for Sekem. They are the founding place for the Eco-Village Network of Africa. So they also provided a lot for African communities. My question is a different one. It's related to projects of a company that I'm working for, and it relates to what you said about fossil water and underground water. So whenever I think about greening the desert, source as a limiting factor is like the first question. So can you just maybe take 2 or 3 more minutes? How are you managing this without actually exploiting fossil water resources? Because I just assume this is a no-go. Or maybe I'm wrong. That's my question.
Well, I have learned on my journey so far that sustainability or sustainable development is always about managing trade-offs. It's never perfect. It's always practical challenges ahead. And when we go into the desert to create value, to finance on a larger scale social innovation, then we also at the moment face the situation that one of our most energetic farms where renewable energy is happening, community building is happening, they're relying on fossil water. And I cannot change this now. I can only say we have to be very transparent, very well monitoring this and trying to be as sustainable as possible with this water resource and search for a dialogue with the local stakeholders to deal with that problem together, because it's not that we wouldn't, it's not that if we wouldn't do it, things would not go on. So we want to be part of that story, part of that frontier of, I don't know, other corporations and so on who go there in, and we want to show how to make things differently. And as I said, you can argue if it's 100 or 200 years, but it's a limited resource, and we have to deal with that. And my perspective at the moment is that we have to really think in a large scale of how to green the desert, how to change weather patterns. And if I'm doing it right now there to gain experience, to maybe become active as an acupunctural point for, as I mentioned in the Sinai, if there are models to show that if you green the Sinai, you can change the weather pattern of the region. So the scale of the global problem requires also a scale of an answer, and we have to be crazy enough to go for it. And I take the challenge and I take the critic, but we have to deal with it. So the critic is real. Yeah.
Danke. Carla Schulte-Fischlik aus Berlin, verstehe mich als Netzwerkerin, Multiplikatorin bezüglich ökologischer Nachhaltigkeit. Ich hatte Sekem schon mal in einem anderen Kontext kennengelernt und hatte neulich bei einer Landwirtschaftskonferenz darüber erzählt. Und dann kam so das Argument einmal mit den Kosten, ob das skalierbar ist. Sie hatten das gerade gesagt, Investments sind, glaube ich, der erste Punkt. Mich würde mich interessieren, was braucht es, damit es weiter skaliert werden kann, weil ich sehe da ganz große Chancen drin. Auch bezüglich Wasser gibt es zum Beispiel Konzepte, das Wasser aus der Luft zu gewinnen. Und was sind weitere Punkte, die noch kritisch sind?
Okay, the question is about scaling up and water management. So,
yeah, scaling up requires people who are able to drive that transition and hold responsible roles in this endeavor. Technology is available in the world. We know what to do, but we have to do it in the local context and deal with challenges that arise. Finance is an issue, but I don't think that we have a problem of money in the world. There's enough money, and there's enough, and we need just concrete projects that have real value. And here comes the point. We have to recognize the real value. So if I invest 50 million or what, where's the return on investment? If I look only on cash, on money, then I have a problem. If I look on carbon stored, health benefits achieved, educational aspects covered by this integrated community building approach, health aspects covered, then we are talking about the kind of true cost perspective, which is en vogue and which is necessary. And then we are creating a societal benefit or a community benefit that hopefully will not have any problem to attract people, talents, and money, I hope.
I think, unfortunately, we have reached the end of the time and had not the possibility to discuss more, but I hope there will be more discussions in between. We have now the lunch break, and we find each other back in the Humboldt-Saal at 1:30, and probably you will be approachable, and the people, the panelists will be approachable for you on the lunch break. Thank you very much.